Where I live, by the wild wood, do you hear them? By those trees who call rain, by the trees who sound of wind. And sometimes you listen, and you go outside and there's barely a breeze, but all the trees are moving. Now here, deep in the wildlands, it's chestnut and acacia and ash, slow-moving trees that sing old songs as they warp the weather and slowly turn those men that would conquer them mad. For many move here, and they are going to clear out the forest and make it suitable for crops. And the merciful, the forest kills quickly with mud and rock and branch. But when it's cruel, it dries them slowly. Ill choice by ill chance, drink by temper by drink to madness. It took me a long time. It took me that journey with my old Swedish friend Sven to really understand. I remember I was sitting one day when I was young in England, and he came in brandishing a book, written in high old Germanic, high old Swedish. And he said, "Look at this. It is the work of the great writer Magnus de Garde." Now I knew of Magnus de Garde. Of course I did. Any student would. He, the greatest alchemist of his day, who had followed paths old and modern to achieve ends that no man should try. But Sven said, but here he argues something different. Written at the end of his life, when his study was at full wrought, he realizes that all the creatures that men see in the forest, all the fae and all the elves, are but them trying to give that which the forest lacks, a soul. For woods walk by themselves alone. I remember he said it. And soon, long before I knew why, he was planning that he and I should ride down the Danube through the greatest willow forests in Europe. I remember he said it. The willow, you see, the willow lives and dies quickly. And you may see in midsummer the willows move while only knowing that other trees must. I don't know if you know the Danube. We were going to go down in a kayak, down from Bucharest, south, through the gates of the Carpathians, past Belgrade, and ever on we went. And it was so beautiful. A land haunted once by vampires. Oh, I felt almost at home. But all the way, Sven was very silent. He was at the rear of the boat, but he was stronger than I. And we were landing each night in an inn, until we came to that wild stretch, right in the arc of the Carpathians, where there are no humans, where the willows march down to the shore, so that you're not sure where the shore begins or ends. I remember I was curious about them, and I made the canoe go right close. I looked down, and there were their roots, like blind suckers, coming up as I looked, it seemed to touch the surface of the river. Just then, it was at midsummer, we heard a voice calling. Now neither of us spoke Serb, but they were pointing further downstream and crying out. Oh, it could have been a warning. And it was true. The occasional river traffic we saw had gone. And those boats we saw rowed by some wild Slovak were all going upstream, the opposite way from us. And some tapped their heads as we passed, and others shouted warnings. But we were young. And Sven, in particular, closed his ears. At last, at the end of the day, we came across an eyot right in the middle of the stream. There was no way onto that isle, I first thought as we rowed round, for the willows surrounded it with their great roots, red tentacles into black river. But as we went round a second time, with Sven muttering all the way, suddenly I cried out, "Look! Look!" For there was an inlet. I hadn't seen it before. Exactly the size of our canoe. It could have been made for us. And we rowed in over that black slime that you cannot walk in without slipping. And I looked down, and the roots were moving in the stream. I climbed out the front into deep mud where I thought there had been solid land, and it sucked me down, and with great struggle I pulled my boots out and pulled the canoe up, wrestling it seemed. And then Sven jumped out, and we pulled the boat away from the willows, for the willows were only around the centre of the isle. And we went then to its centre, to a low hillock, and there we made a little fire. Although Sven had counselled against it, I insisted. For in this land nights were cold and long, and wolves frequent. We spent that night, and it seemed to me as I listened, there was a great wind in the willows, calling, ever calling, and I listened and listened and listened again. But I did not know what it was. And you know what was strange? There must have been some odd effect from us being in that isle. For although all the willows were clearly moving in the night, I could feel no wind at all. And Sven, I don't know whether he slept or not. He looked out always into the dark, muttering to himself. And you could feel the wood everywhere, as if humans had never been, as if humans now were not. Sven rose at dawn and got me up. I had dozed off, I think. And we went down to the canoe. He was agitated and wanted to go, and he pushed it out experimentally into the water. And I said, "What's the problem? It looks fine to me." But as it went out into the water, I saw that it was taking on river water. And at a rate so quick, it would have floundered just as we got past the roots of the willows. And I said, "Curious." For although it was made of canvas, it was heavy canvas, and we had beached it well in the morning, and the little willow that was touching it didn't seem to me to be enough. It was just the red roots after all, although I hadn't noticed it in the evening when we had moored the boat. Well, Sven pulled the boat out sharpish and turned it on its head and drained it from water. And then we looked, and we saw the bottom of the boat was pockmarked, as if something had sunk into it, its slow suckers. 3 panels were out. Well, Sven smiled and said, "It's all right. He travels heavy." And in his pack he pulled out some canvas and he said he could stick it there, but it would take a day to dry. And he insisted that we took the canoe out of the water, right up to the top of their ayot, and there he stuck it with glue. All morning that took us. And in the afternoon, I remember hearing only the murmuring stream, looking at the clouds rise from the forest beyond it. I paced round and round the island, as if I was a caged animal. I could feel the forest and that slow dread man gets at night. I shivered when I knew it was Midsummer Eve, and the peasants of these land think that is a day of ill omen, when in the brief night spirits are free to walk. So night fell at last, and I was tired, but Sven was distraught and distrait. He paced up and down all night, it seemed, and then sometime, it might have been around 3 o'clock, just before dawn, he screamed and ran, shouting, "They need one!" And he ran, and I heard him fall into the stream. Now Sven is no swimmer, but I am. I jumped in after him, diving over the roots that seemed everywhere, and I pulled him free, for they had already seemed to attach onto his body, but muttering what charms I knew, from this land and the other. I pulled him through, cutting them with a knife. The roots seemed on him. Pulling him up into the creek, which had more roots than I remembered. Pulling him onto the isle and pumping his chest. And his chest seemed to be cut with roots. And I wasn't sure whether he would live or die. And if he died, what would happen to me stuck upon that island? I could not manage the canoe alone. I watched the sun rose on midsummer. And just then, I heard something. It must have been the other side of the stream. A loud cry. And I looked, and there was a peasant fallen into the water. And the water seemed to bear him away, and there must have been a strange current, for it pulled him right down, as if something was pulling him down, and he was down for half an hour or more. And then, as the sun rose higher, I watched him wallow up, and Sven suddenly sat up and said, "Look, the willow has its own." And we climbed to the edge of the ayah to see if we could pass him, and pass how slowly he did. His face seemed already covered with roots, as if when he went down, the trees had snagged him fast. He looked at us with the blank eyes of fear and death. And then Sven got the boat out up from the top of the isle, and I asked if he was all right, and he said he would be now. And we launched the boat, and the willow parted as if falling asleep. And down we drifted to the mouth of the Danube without anything else happening. And I never went back, and Sven, he went back to Sweden. I never saw him again. It was like some dark secret between us. But still, when I listened to the wind and to the sound the trees make in it, I remember the willow and how it moves almost fast enough for us to see.